welcome back to SUPERSTAT, the podcast where we explore the science, policy, and sometimes controversy behind laboratory medicine. I am A.A. Odie, and I'm here with my co-hosts.
Stat Stephanie.
And Melody.
All right.
And today we're diving into something many clinicians, laboratorians, and patients encounter every single day, which is continuous glucose monitoring, or CGM.
Yeah, these small wearable sensors have transformed diabetes care. They provide real-time glucose data, they trend arrows, they do alarms and insights for fingerstick testing. Instead of fingerstick testing, right? The fingerstick testing can't deliver those types of insights or real-time data with minimal pokes. And so this is the question we're exploring today. If these CGMs are so powerful, why do our guidelines still tell us to confirm their readings with traditional point-of-care testing?
That's a good point. So we're unpacking the evidence today, the course of physiology, and the clinical realities behind that question on today's episode of SUPERSTAT.
Glucose monitoring meant capillary blood testing, right? Classic finger stick. For a long time, that was the only option. Patients would check their glucose multiple times a day using handheld glucometers. And it was a lifesaver, right, in its time, and there's definitely a place for it. In the last, though, 15 to 20 years, CGM technology has really changed the game.
Right. So CGM monitors and measures glucose levels and interstitial fluid, providing readings over a few minutes, generating a dynamic glucose profile over time. And I think we have, many friends and family members that are using this.
Yeah, so it's a day-to-day thing. But yeah, the technology has that clear benefits. It's got real-time glucose data, so spot it at the moment. Kind of trend arrow predicts the glucose direction, so kind of letting them know kind of where they are, how they are, and then alerts for hypo and hyperglycemia, and it improved glycemic control and kind of lowers A1C in many different patients. So lots of different benefits.
Yeah, there's been some studies that have even shown CGM use just by itself can reduce A1C and improve glycemic variability compared to traditional self-monitoring approaches. So patients are more apt to use the insights from it and be more open to changing, almost like a gamification in some ways.
Right. But also, instead of having one isolated data point of a single finger stick at several different times of the day, clinicians can now see continuous glucose trends, which is better for insulin titration and lifestyle adjustments.
Yeah, and I think that's where things get really interesting because despite all these technological advances, the clinical guidelines still include a crucial caveat. The American Diabetes Association recommends confirming CGM readings with point-of-care glucose testing, particularly when clinical decisions are being made or when hypoglycemia is suspected. So that means even if you have a CGM, you still got to be doing finger sticks.
Yeah. So similarly, the Endocrine Society recommends caution in certain hospitalized patients. The American Association of Clinical Endocrinology, so our AACE, they recommend confirming these CGM detected hypoglycemia with finger sticks. So we're still having to do that extra step to kind of confirm.
Yeah, and that can be really confusing for patients because I can see why people would hesitate when they become inpatient, especially if your CGM is good enough at home, then why isn't it considered the source of truth when you're admitted into the hospital?
Yeah, and I think this comes back to the clinical science of it all because the CGM and how it's actually measuring glucose, it's not measuring blood glucose directly. Instead, it's measuring glucose, again, in that interstitial fluid, which is the fluid surrounding cells or in the tissue, right? So the difference introduces something that's called a physiologic lag time, where glucose, we know the molecule takes time to move from blood into interstitial fluid.
Yeah, to continue on kind of with what you were saying about just the literature itself states that the lag can range from 15 to 20 minutes. So depending on the individual and the device, so lots of different variables here, the clinical concern isn't really during periods when glucose levels are stable, where the difference between interstitial and blood glucose is minimal, but the main thing is during rapid glucose changes, like after a meal, after we exercise, or after insulin administration. So there's things that you do every day you don't really kind of think about, but the lag difference can become significant.
Yeah, which makes sense in an inpatient or admission setting with exacerbating circumstances, procedures, and NPO status could attribute to bigger fluctuations in those glucose levels.
Yeah, and I think it's important to call out for the listeners. We're not saying don't trust your CGM device, right? But like you could be a person where your lag is 5 minutes. You could be a person in a situation where your lag is 20 minutes in the same person, right? In the same individual. So for daily use, these CGMs are remarkably good. They're just not perfect, right? And so several limitations also can affect the sensor readings beyond just the physiology. So there's this phenomenon known as a pressure effect where or compression lows is like the other term we use. And it can occur like if someone sleeps on the sensor or applies pressure to it, like a lot of pressure to it, you can falsely lower your glucose levels.
And ironically, the moment where clinicians care about accuracy the most, which is hypoglycemia, is also where the sensors are the least reliable, as Melanie just mentioned. Experts note that CGM can sometimes miss or underestimate hypoglycemic events.
Yeah, and that's why confirmatory testing remains important throughout the hospital. We still do that confirmatory testing too.
Yeah, and as we do, as one does, right, on this podcast, we take a value lens to the situation. So if we step out of just like the technical laboratory piece of it that we just kind of ran through, CGM has this fascinating area with inpatient diabetes management, which COVID-19 actually highlighted. During the pandemic, hospitals, began experimenting with CGMs to reduce staff exposure to going into patient rooms over and over again if they had COVID to do their glucose sticks. And then they thought, well, maybe this could improve our glycemic surveillance. And so there is some research that suggests CGM could eventually become the standard of inpatient care for select patients.
I know a lot of nurses that would be happy about that because we actually use glucometers on wave testing on our floors, and we are constantly talking about compliance with those, and they're being very compliant, but it's always fun. Mm-hmm. But the evidence base still is evolving. Regulatory guidance does vary. So just some of the challenges that are kind of being faced are like we mentioned earlier, the sensor placement issues, critically ill physiology is another one to kind of keep up with. Perfusion changes, that's another kind of big one too there. We also have medication effects. So these factors can influence CGM accuracy.
Right. But then again, as we look at this through the value lens, what does the future of CGM look like in practice? We can all imagine that this is what matters most to the patients. This is helpful to the patient. It's easy. It's mindless. They don't have to have those constant finger pokes. And I have several family members who are struggling or living through diabetes as part of their healthcare journey. And I know that finger poke was an inconvenience in their lives. But despite these challenges, CGM technology continues to improve. And so what do we in the lab need to say or do to kind of feel like, okay, let's do this. This is okay?
I think it's going to take some time from the lab side, but I do agree with you. Like, this is a real value add for patients. And I can even say, I've experienced where patients are like, absolutely not. You're not sticking my finger. I have a CGM, right? And then having to have that conversation can be very challenging, especially if it's already a high stakes conversation that you've walked into. I think we have to realize CGMs are getting more and more sophisticated. I think as a laboratory community, this comes back to us becoming educated into what the biosensor market is trying to accomplish and what these predictive AI models are doing. Because I think what we're trying to get to is this artificial pancreas type world where these biosensors and models can predict the glycemic fluxes altogether and auto adjust, like automatically. And I think that's amazingly cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's crazy where we're headed. That would be revolutionary if you just sit back and kind of think on it. Where we are now, and where we're going is pretty impressive. So let me kind of shift gears again on the value add. So who owns glucose measurements? Traditionally, that answer was clear, clinical laboratories, but now it's not so clear cut, and we kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's true, because if the reference standard for glucose remains laboratory centric or validated point of care testing, that means that the laboratory will remain the anchor of accuracy for glucose testing. And if accuracy and testing and value for the patient are pitted against each other, I guess it's all to be determined who wins that fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough place to be in because accuracy is so important. I mean, you don't get value for your diagnostic, outcomes if you don't have accuracy, but you also, if you don't have patient engagement and understanding, you lose a different type of value, right? We didn't satisfy what matters to them. And so I think it's a call out again as a reminder that as laboratorians, we will continue to play a role in new technology emergence, whether that's validating devices, interpreting discrepancies, and developing monitoring protocols. I think we're definitely going to need one in this space for point of care. There's going to have to be some kind of oversight for CGMs in patient environments. What that looks like, I don't know. But we have to be engaged, because what we don't want to happen is this to happen in a silo. I guarantee you that there are some labs out there and maybe some listeners out there who probably didn't know that their floors were doing this during COVID, or may still do that today, or maybe doing it today, or letting someone do it thinking like, oh, it's going to be fine, right? But maybe not understanding like the methodology piece of it, which is part of our training as scientists, and where this could go wrong.
Yeah. And even the most advanced sensors still rely on that old-fashioned principle, trust but verify.
You love saying that, Stephanie.
Good phrase. True. Even with the value add, finger stick confirmation remains a safety check when readings don't match symptoms or when hypoglycemia is suspected. And it's that balance between innovation and verification. So that's one of my favorite words, verification. That's work. So it's exactly where laboratory medicine kind of does thrive.
Yeah, this is obviously a conversation that could continue on. And I think it's kind of one of those circles, right? Like chicken and the egg kind of talks around value versus accuracy and which one wins. But for today, this is all that we have time for on this episode of SUPERSTAT. So we can continue the conversation in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into CGM and technology and laboratory medicine, subscribe and share this episode with your colleagues. We'd love their thoughts as well.
And as always, stay curious, stay scientific, follow us. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep asking the questions behind the tests.
Bye.
Bye.